Good morning, members of the media and the Canadian viewing public. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Marcus Thompson. I am the Executive Director of the Black Class Action Secretariat, a non-profit organization that is committed to dismantling systemic discrimination in Canada's public services. As we gather here during Black History Month, a period dedicated to recognizing and celebrating the vast contributions and achievements of Black Canadians, it is especially meaningful and indeed critical that we confront the persistent challenges and systemic barriers facing Black Canadians today. This month serves as a reminder not only of how far we have come, but also of the journey ahead towards true equality and justice. Today, I'm joined by representatives from several organizations collectively representing close to 700,000 Canadians. To my right is the Director of Advocacy for the Black Class Action Secretariat and Director of Racial Profiling for the Red Coalition. To my left, we have the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, Chris Aylward, Jason MacLean, Secretary-Treasurer of the National Union of Public and General Employees. To my right, we have Shanique Victoria Edwards, Director of Mental Health, Outreach and Strategy at the Canadian Black Nurses Alliance. Faduma Ways from the Federation of Black Canadians, and Hodan Ahmed, Senior United Nations Fellow and Lead for the Black Canadians Civil Society Coalition. I would also like to recognize our other partners in the fight to dismantle systemic discrimination, and that is the 819-613 Black Hub and the Enchanti Network, who is not present with us today. Our presence here today underscores the gravity of the issue we are addressing and our collective commitment to bringing about meaningful change. Since 2020, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the public service acknowledged that systemic discrimination and anti-Black racism were pervasive in all of our institutions. In 2021, the late clerk of the Privy Council, Mr. Ian Sugar, made a laudable call for the public service to address systemic discrimination by promoting Black, Indigenous, and racialized workers into leadership roles. Regrettably, this call to action has largely been ignored by the public service, with no substantial, tangible plans implemented to redress anti-Black racism and discrimination. And for the record, all Black employees want is to show up to work, serve Canadians to the best of their abilities, and to be recognized for their efforts, to be promoted to opportunities that they are qualified for. Basic human rights, nothing special. The Canadian Human Rights Commission, which should be at the forefront of promoting and protecting human rights, advocating for change as Canada's human rights protector, has itself been discriminatory. Its employees have reported experiences of overt and subtle racism and discrimination that denied them promotional opportunities. Despite the CRC's, the Commission's public statements to tackle these issues, employees continue to experience their reality is starkly different. In March 2023, the Treasury Board Secretariat upheld claims that the Commission breached 3 collective agreements. There are no discrimination clauses, mandating discrimination-free workplaces. And just December, the Senate Human Rights Committee, their investigation uncovered extensive evidence of anti-Black racism and discrimination within the Canadian Human Rights Commission, describing it as a national scandal. These practices not only contravene the Commission's mandate, but also violate international human rights law. Particularly, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, but most crucially, these actions violate the Paris Principles, which are fundamental to the accreditation of national human rights institutions. The Commission's failure to adhere to these principles calls into question its effectiveness and integrity as a human rights watchdog. The Commission is responsible for receiving and addressing complaints from employees within the federal public service, federally regulated workplaces, and the Canadian public. It is mandated under the Employment Equity Act for conducting employment equity audits, a critical function that underscores its role in promoting fair and inclusive work environments. But the failure of the Commission to meet its mandate not only erodes its own integrity, but also significantly hampers the capacity of the entire public service to combat discrimination effectively. This has resulted in discrimination and discriminatory practices within the public service being allowed to go unchecked. Today, we demand accountability. Today, we're announcing a complaint with the international body that accredits human rights institutions across the world. We are seeking to hold the Canadian Human Rights Commission accountable for its human rights violations. Make no mistake, our goal is clear: to see the Commission not just meet its obligations, but to become a beacon of justice and equality, embodying the principles it's supposed to champion. Today, more than ever, we need the Commission to be a steadfast champion of the fundamental rights that are the cornerstone of a strong democracy. We are committed to working with the Commission and the Government of Canada to address systemic discrimination and anti-Black racism. But there must be accountability. Black workers must be at the table leading this work. We are concerned about the government's approach with addressing anti-Black discrimination in the public service. Just last week, the Treasury Board of the President of the Treasury Board, Minister Anita Anand, announced some measures to address anti-Black discrimination in the public service. But Black employee networks were not consulted. Unions were not consulted. And we understand that a non-Black person is leading the task force for the Black Action Plan. This is unacceptable. We urge the Government of Canada to take significant steps toward rectifying systemic discrimination within its structures, namely to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act to create a direct access model allowing complaints to go directly to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and repurposing the Canadian Human Rights Commission to support complainants with their matters at the tribunal. Amend the Employment Equity Act to better reflect intersectionality and specifically include Black and other equity-deserving groups as designated groups. And that call to action is very important because we've seen the clerk's call to action gone by the wayside. The federal public service will not implement and address systemic discrimination in the absence of legislation. We're also seeking the appointment of a Black Equity Commissioner as an independent officer of Parliament to oversee and ensure equity across levels of government and the public service. And finally, as I've mentioned earlier on, there must be accountability. It is imperative that those who have committed discrimination to be held accountable. This includes a thorough leadership of the Canadian Human Rights Commission and necessary changes to prevent further occurrences. Because we simply cannot have the same people who have presided over systemic discrimination to now be responsible for fixing it. Thank you very much. I will now pass the floor to the Director of Advocacy for the Black Class Action Secretariat, Alain Babineau.
Bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, notre coalition affirme avec force le droit fondamental des communautés noires au Canada, celui d'être reconnus et respectés comme des membres à part entière de notre société. Nous tenons la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne pour responsable de garantir que ce droit inaliénable soit scrupuleusement observé sous son égide. Il est crucial de mettre en avant que la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne, créée en 1977 sous l'égide de la Charte canadienne, représente la pierre angulaire de la supervision et de la sauvegarde des droits humains au Canada. Cette entité occupe une position prééminente dans la définition des standards et des pratiques d'excellence, servant de référence aux législations en matière de droits de la personne au niveau provincial et territorial. Ces dernières partageant une grande affinité avec la législation fédérale, aspirent à adopter ces normes élevées. Les principes fondamentaux qu'elles mettent en œuvre sont largement similaires. Par conséquent, la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne se positionne non seulement comme une source d'inspiration, mais aussi comme un leader influent pour les organismes dédiés à la protection des droits humains à travers l'ensemble des provinces et territoires du Canada. C'est une grosse responsabilité. Dotée d'un mandat exhaustif, la Commission est investie de sa responsabilité de traiter les plaintes de discrimination à travers un processus rigoureux, incluant le filtrage, la médiation, la représentation juridique dans l'intérêt supérieur de la justice. La Commission assure non seulement la supervision de l'application de la Charte canadienne qui proscrit toute forme de discrimination, mais elle doit aussi veiller à l'application de la loi sur l'équité en matière d'emploi visant à favoriser l'égalité sur le lieu du travail. C'est une très grosse responsabilité. En ma qualité de défenseur des droits, je suis régulièrement sollicité pour soutenir les victimes de discrimination, que ce soit au sein du secteur public fédéral ou face à les agissements des employés du gouvernement fédéral. Des défis tels que les retards procéduraux, une sensibilisation insuffisante aux problématiques de discrimination systémique et de racisme anti-noir sur le lieu du travail, ainsi que les profilages raciaux par les entités fédérales demeurent malheureusement monnaie courante. La retraumatisation des victimes par un processus ignorant leur contexte culturel spécifique ainsi que l'opposition au changement de la part de ceux en position de pouvoir aggrave encore ces difficultés. Il est impératif que la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne adopte une approche proactive pour reconnaître et protéger les travailleurs noirs dans la fonction publique, agissant comme un bouclier contre les représailles et les réactions négatives. C'est un gros défi, une grosse responsabilité. Les victimes de racisme anti-noir appellent de leur vœu une commission dirigée par des leaders et des décideurs sensibles aux questions culturelles et conscients des traumatismes. Elles exigent de la commission qu'elle envoie un message sans équivoque aux individus racistes au sein de l'organisation même et au sein de la fonction publique fédérale dans son ensemble. Le message est clair, la commission doit incarner une posture antiraciste et non simplement se déclarer non raciste. Considérée comme une institution de statut A par l'Alliance mondiale des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme en 1999, en 2006, en 2011, en 2016 et en 2023, la Commission est appelée à jouer un rôle déterminant dans la promotion et la protection des droits humains au Canada. C'est là sa mission fondamentale. La Commission a admis ses manquements dans la lutte contre le racisme anti-noir. C'est le moment pour elle d'expier de ses péchés. Les classifications de la gannerie ne doivent pas être perçues comme de simples symboles, mais une reconnaissance prestigieuse de l'excellence en matière des droits humains, fruit d'un engagement authentique en faveur de la défense des principes fondamentaux. C'est une très grosse responsabilité. Merci.
Thank you, Alain. I would now like to invite the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, Chris Aylward.
Thank you, Nicholas. Good morning, everyone. The Canadian Human Rights Commission's failure to combat systemic racism within its own ranks strikes at the heart of justice for workers. As representatives of Black federal public sector workers, PSAC demands immediate reform to restore the Commission's integrity and efficacy. It's time for action, not words. PSAC joins the Black Class Action, unions, and human rights organizations calling for a transparent, inclusive process to rebuild the trust that has been eroded in Canada's human rights process. A thorough reassessment of the Commission's accreditation is necessary to chart a path forward for the Commission and ensure it can continue its crucial role for Canadians. There must be serious reforms at the Commission so that it can once again champion human rights without question and embody the principles of diversity and inclusion it is mandated to protect. PSAC reiterates its full support for the Black Class Action lawsuit and all Black, Indigenous, Asian, and racialized workers who continue to experience racism and discrimination in Canada's public service. 1,500 people have signed on to the Black Class Action lawsuit, while PSAC represents 70% of the signatories. PSAC also fully supports the Senate Standing Committee's recommendation following its investigation into long-standing issues of systemic racism at the Canadian Human Rights Commission.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'd now like to invite Hodan Ahmed, Senior UN Fellow and Lead for the Black Canadian Civil Society Coalition.
Hi, everyone. So racism is deeply embedded in the Canadian Human Rights Commission, evident by the Treasury Board Secretary of Canada report in March of 2023 and the Senate of Canada Human Rights Committee finding in December of 2023. The Canadian Human Rights Commission, the federal body responsible for resolving allegations of racism and other forms of discrimination, was guilty of discriminating against their own Black employees and dismissing cases of race-based complaint at a higher rate. As a UN Human Rights Fellow, representing the Decade for People of African Descent, and someone who's also representing the Black and Canadian Coalition Civil Society, my work within Canada is to promote and protect the critical objectives of the decade. And for this press conference purpose, the fundamental pillar I'm going to highlight is justice. My role is to call on the Canadian government to live up to its promises and declare a commitment with when it came to recognizing the decade, address the condition of Black people in this country, including employees of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, provide policy recommendations that directly remedy the human rights concerns, specifically the injury that has occurred on the employees of the Canadian Human Rights Commissions who have yet to receive specific remedies to address the discrimination that they've experienced. It becomes a matter of public health. The Canadian government has consistently stated its plan to combat anti-Black racism from a whole government approach that builds upon the framework of the decade by developing policies and projects that tackle anti-Black racism, discrimination, and biases in both the public and the private institutions. Unfortunately, the federal government has taken few actionable commitments to meaningfully implement measures to achieve the objective of the decade, and as well as the policy recommendation that was made. Canada has a solid legal and policy framework to combat racial discrimination and advance substantive equality, but it has yet to implement directly from an anti-Black racism lens. The Canadian Human Rights Commission has violated the Charter of Right and Freedom, Section 15 and Clause 1, which guarantees equal right to all individuals, protection against discrimination, and the benefit of the law, all form of discrimination, in particular without discrimination based on race, nationality, ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental health and physical disability. So the fundamental core or the function of the Canadian Human Rights Commission is at risk here. Its integrity and the way in which that's supposed to uphold the Charter of Right and protect the human right of its own employees, as well as anyone who files a case within the Canadian Human Rights Commission. There's a need for an enforceable mechanism that directly speak to anti-Black racism within the Canadian Human Rights Commission that ensures accountability and transparency so the racism and discrimination Black employees have experienced do not continue. The urgency of now must be reflected in how the Canadian government responds to this official complaint that we are filing today regarding the Canadian Human Rights Commission's non-compliance with the Paris Principles while considering our specific recommendations, specifically the 3 recommendations that Nicholas have spoken about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hodan. I'd now like to invite Shanique Victoria Edwards, who is the Director of Mental Health Outreach and Strategies at the Canadian Black Nurses Alliance.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Canadian Black Nurses Alliance is the preeminent national organization dedicated to amplifying the voices of Black nurses and nursing students. With a commitment to addressing the unmet need for Black nursing perspectives, we proudly represent over 200,000 nurses. Our focus is Black-centric, yet inclusive. As an organization, we recognize that anti-Black racism and racial trauma intersects with all people who identify as a member of the Black and African diaspora across all professions and sectors, and we are deeply concerned about anti-Black discrimination at the Commission, and we are in solidarity to hold the Commission accountable. Acknowledging the negative impact of systemic anti-Black racism and racial trauma is vital to improving mental health outcomes for all Black Canadians. Alarm bells are ringing due to the declining mental health state of Black people across the country as a result of the effects, both psychological and physiological, of systemic anti-Black racism. Daily experiences of racial discrimination lead to racial trauma, and its detrimental effects reverberate through the lives of Black people. Not only Black individuals, but the crescendo effect of these poor outcomes affects Black families and Black communities, and this is witnessed by increased self-reports of poor mental health and well-being amongst Black people across this country. The acute and residual stress that Black people face due to intersecting with institutions, systems, and policies that perpetuate anti-Black racism and racial discrimination, both overtly and covertly, compromises their psychological safety, and it's traumatizing. At increasing rates, Black people are presenting with a breadth of physical complaints, ranging from headaches and sleep disturbance to gastroenterological problems, cardiopulmonary disease, diabetes, hypertension, conditions that are known to lead to premature death among Black people at higher rates than the general population. In tandem to these physical ailments that not only affect their mental health, they are often concurrent with other psychological disorders such as anxiety and panic, depression, PTSD, hypervigilance, mental fatigue, poor concentration, emotional dysregulation, declining self-esteem and self-worth, burnout, internalized racism, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation. Adverse mental health outcomes that are directly related to being disadvantaged and marginalized solely on the basis of one's skin color. And this is not a historical phenomenon. These effects are a present reality for all Black Canadians. And Black people are vocalizing, we're here vocalizing the mental and the physical exhaustion that arises from the sense of hopelessness, from trying to continuously and tirelessly advocate against these injustices. We must recognize that Black people simply have no means of escaping from these traumatic experiences, and they ultimately perpetuate stress, leading to an ever-present and an acute stressed state, also augmenting poor physical and psychological symptoms, re-traumatization, and leaving the mental health of Black people in peril. Not to mention, the psychological and physical health of Black Canadians is consistently underserved compared to the general population, another result of systemic racism, perpetuating a cycle that is eroding the overall mental health of Black people across this country. We can no longer walk blindly around the currents of anti-Black racism that plagues our national and provincial institutions. Black Canadians can no longer be asked to set aside their mental well-being and the right to psychological safety in order to be seen, acknowledged, and treated equitably in society, because for Black people, families, and communities, it is a matter of life and death. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanique. I'd now like to invite Jason MacLean, who is the Secretary Treasurer for the National Union of, the National Union of Public and General Employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you to everyone on this panel for being here. And thank you all for the work that you and your teams do every day, far from the limelight, to make life just a little fairer and just a little better for everyone in all our communities and our workplaces. My name is Jason MacLean. I'm Secretary Treasurer of the National Union of Public and General Employees, a board member of the BCAS, and a lifetime human rights advocate. I, like many others, have utilized the services of a Human Rights Commission, the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, because unfortunately, discrimination in our country is alive and well. The work of the Canadian Human Rights Commission is tasked with is important for everyone in Canada because a more equitable and inclusive society is better for everyone. But for the marginalized and the vulnerable in our country who are subjected to discrimination and numerous indignities in all aspects of their life, the CHRC is a critical institution we look to help protect our rights, the rights of our children, and the rights of our families. Imagine then our dismay when the Senate of Canada Human Rights Committee and Treasury Board Secretariat found that this institution we rely on has a higher dismissal rate for race-based complaints, and that all white teams are typically assigned by the Commission to investigate these complaints. And obviously attached to that, when we read the findings uncovered by the Senate, it showed that in 2018, just 6% of cases based on race, color, national ethnic origin were deemed credible enough. The reviewers expressed concern about the Commission's ability to handle race-based complaints and in a fair and equitable way. I feel the same. So let's look back to last August, where an entire family of Black Canadians, 9 people, I believe, age 5 to 60 years old, were thrown off an airplane after 2 family members asked about a piece of luggage left on the tarmac. They said they would file a complaint of racial profiling and discrimination with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. But we know right now that they may never get the fair hearing that they want. They really cannot count on the Commission as it currently operates. So let me reiterate, as my fellow panelists have said, we're here because we cannot afford to have an ineffective Commission. We need it to do its job and help to protect our rights. This is a federal organization serving all Canadians. We hope that the step we are taking to ensure that the Canadian Human Rights Commission fulfills its mandate to protect our rights, and we will ensure that it does just that. Also, we hope that the Commission will set an example for the provincial human rights commissions to make positive changes that are needed to meet the needs of the people in their respective jurisdictions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason. So this concludes our press conference. And in closing, I just really want to reiterate that we want to see the Canadian Human Rights Commission succeed because the very foundation of justice in our public service and equality that is enshrined in our Charter of Rights and Freedom, that very foundation, we're relying on the Canadian Human Rights Commission to play a leading role in the fight to dismantle systemic discrimination, not to be the perpetrator in all of this. So we're calling on the appropriate levels of government to come to the table, whether that's the Ministry of the Department of Justice, the Treasury Board, as well as the Commission. Come to the table. The solutions to address these issues are there, and let's work together towards implementing the changes that's needed. Thank you very much.
We'll take questions.
Hi, I'm Catherine, a reporter with the Ottawa Citizen. Thanks so much for all of your time today. I'm just wondering if you could share what kind of changes, what kind of reform would you like to see at the CHRC, and how would you like exactly to see leadership be held accountable?
Well, we are hoping that the Commission and the Government of Canada, first we need to see legislative changes. We're told by employees of the Commission that their hands are tied on a lot of the issues. So we need to see legislative changes. The Canadian Human Rights Act is due for amendments, for modernization. So we would like to see those legislative changes. But also importantly, we need a people change at the Commission. We need to see strong leadership and representative leadership, not just one black person here or there. We need to see a diverse range of representation at the Commission to represent diverse perspectives. We need to see Indigenous representation and racialized and black representation in senior leadership at the Commission to be able to move this work, because as I've mentioned, we've seen the folks who have presided over decades of this discrimination is now being tasked to implement a change, and nothing is happening very slowly.
As well, I know it was mentioned that there was funding announced last week by the government for initiatives across 3 organizations in the public service to address discrimination. I'm wondering, as more funding is continued to be rolled out, would you like to see any funding go towards addressing issues at the CHRC specifically?
Absolutely. I think a big part of addressing this discrimination is appropriate resources. So if the Canadian Human Rights Commission does not have appropriate funding to be able to properly reform and to have the appropriate amount of staff to ensure complaints are heard in a timely manner, the time frame to get a complaint through the Commission and to get even an acknowledgement, it's way too long. So we would like to see appropriate funding and the government not cut funding for the Canadian Human Rights Commission as any type of remedy to address any shortfalls or any budgetary issues, to not sacrifice that on human rights. That I think is critically important. Thank you.
Chantal, oui, Franco-Presse. Vous dites que, je pense... Je m'excuse. Vous dites que les défenseurs noirs n'ont pas été consultés avant l'annonce du plan d'action de Mme Anita Hanan. Ça signifie quoi, en fait, de ne pas avoir été consultés pour vous?
De ne pas avoir été consultés, je pense que ça le dit de soi-même, c'est qu'ils n'ont pas eu une opportunité de présenter les avancements du gouvernement qu'ils ont annoncés la semaine passée. Ils n'ont pas eu l'opportunité de commenter et de donner leur opinion sur la validité ou peut-être même exprimer certaines recommandations ou améliorations ou points qui n'ont pas été apportés la semaine passée par la ministre.
Et vous avez pensé quoi, en fait, du plan d'action?
Écoutez, il faut dire que c'est un avancement, mais en même temps, il faut penser que, par exemple, le groupe d'assistance aux employés qui existait déjà, il y a eu quelques millions de dollars qui ont été ajustés. Mais fondamentalement, c'est les personnes en charge de ces avancements qui doit être considéré. C'est-à-dire qu'on doit retrouver une représentativité à l'intérieur de la Commission des droits de la personne à tous les niveaux. OK? Pas juste au niveau directeur, mais aussi au niveau de preneur de décision à tous les niveaux. Alors, c'est ça vraiment que nous, on veut voir. On a présentement une commissaire par intérim depuis pratiquement 2 ans. Alors, si on veut avoir vraiment quelqu'un à la charge, on doit mettre une personne permanente pour que cette personne-là puisse justement faire avancer ses avancées. Alors, on demeure quand même optimiste, mais en même temps, on va surveiller les avancements qui ont été proposés la semaine passée.
Shanique de Radio-Canada. On comprend qu'en ce moment, il y a une réforme, des avancements, mais les employés actuels qui auraient des plaintes à déposer, comment ils peuvent le faire? Est-ce qu'ils sont un peu dans le néant? On sait qu'ils vivent des facteurs de stress, ça peut même être dangereux. Qu'est-ce qui se passe avec ces employés-là?
Vous parlez des employés de la Commission ou des employés at large? Bien, encore une fois, la Commission n'a pas été dévestie de ses responsabilités. Alors, elle demeure quand même l'outil de préférence pour les employés fédéraux à l'interne. Mais je pense que maintenant, pour employer le terme, la Commission a été exposée. C'est-à-dire que ces failles, ces déficiences ont été exposées. Alors, je penserais raisonnablement qu'à l'interne, on va faire très attention lorsque une plainte de discrimination, particulièrement systémique, parce qu'on parle de systèmes à l'intérieur du gouvernement fédéral qui sont déficients. Alors, c'est là où on doit avoir une certaine finesse et ne pas seulement enquêter ou être conscient de discrimination individuelle, mais aussi systémique. Alors, c'est l'outil qui reste en place, mais nous, on va continuer à mettre la pression pour que, justement, cet outil soit amélioré.
Une des mesures qui a été mentionnée, qui est suggérée, c'est de reconvertir la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne pour soutenir les plaignants dans leurs affaires devant le tribunal. Qu'est-ce qu'on veut dire par reconvertir?
Reconvertir, c'est un modèle d'accès direct, OK? Parce que présentement, une plainte à la droit de personne passe à travers un certain filtrage à l'interne, et c'est là où on a vu des failles, des déficiences au niveau de plaintes qui ont été rejetées tout simplement au niveau du filtrage. Lorsqu'elle passe le filtrage, elle doit être enquêtée. On a encore des plaintes qui ont été rejetées au niveau de l'enquête. Vous voyez, il y a plusieurs déficiences dans ces différents processus. Tandis qu'un accès direct, ce serait une plainte qui est déposée, passe directement au tribunal des droits de la personne, comme on revoit en Ontario, et je pense en Colombie-Britannique aussi, un système similaire à ça. Mais fondamentalement, ce sont les personnes qui agissent à l'intérieur de ces systèmes-là, qu'ils soient directs ou indirects, qui doivent changer. Et c'est là-dessus que nous, on met notre accès, même si on demande effectivement, puis il y a quand même des chiffres à l'appui, qu'un accès direct est plus efficient. Merci.
D'autres questions?
Bernadette with Global News. You mentioned the Treasury Board President's announcement last week. So are you saying that she did not consult with any Black organizations on that announcement and on the funding?
What we are saying is that Black employee networks within the federal government were not consulted on that mental health, on that announcement about the employee assistance program, as well as unions. And we're saying that that approach has to change, and there has to be. We're very, very concerned about that. That approach has to change, and let me just say that it's very, very concerning because it's OCRO, the Office of the Chief Human Resource Office, where this work is being done, and just last year, workers there working on the program complained about experiencing the crushing weight of anti-Black racism, and still today, it's very challenging. Workers still tell us about how toxic it is to work at Treasury Board. So we're very, very concerned.
You mentioned as well that you would like the government to hire an independent Black equity commissioner. How would that work?
So the government has, we're seeking for this body to have the same powers as the Auditor General, right? So appointed to have its own independence, report directly to the Parliament of Canada, and to be able to have the policing powers to audit and police the entire federal public service.
We'll now go to Zoom.
Thank you.
If you have a question, please use raise hand function. Et si vous avez une question, utilisez la fonction main levée.
Vous attendez à quoi exactement par rapport à votre annonce? La plainte sur la commission, c'est quoi?
La plainte, c'est l'organisme, le Gannery, qui a une capacité de faire une révision sur le statut de la commission. Et on leur dit pas quoi faire, c'est leur job de faire ces évaluations-là. Alors, tout ce qu'on dit, c'est que ces évaluations-là, ce statut, cette note doit être prise au sérieux. Ce n'est pas juste, comme on dit en anglais, un rubber stamp, mais il doit y avoir quelque chose derrière ça. Alors, c'est vraiment le cœur de la plainte, c'est qu'il y ait une évaluation sérieuse qui soit faite à la lumière des rapports qui ont été présentés vis-à-vis le travail de la commission.
Revenez au plan d'action. Selon vous, qu'est-ce qui manque concrètement pour que un plan d'action comme celui-ci fonctionne?
Une des choses qu'on aurait... Parce qu'il existe en Ontario, hein, au niveau provincial, le Black Equity Commission. Ça fait 2 ans que l'organisme a été mis en place, justement pour faire ce type de travail-là au niveau provincial. Ça aurait été intéressant que le gouvernement regarde, justement, et peut-être utiliser de meilleures pratiques qui ont été mises en place. On sait que ça fait 2 ans seulement, alors c'est encore en période d'observation, si on peut employer l'expression, mais ça aurait été intéressant, au lieu de, justement, arriver avec des mesures on s'appelle tampon ou band-aid, si on peut employer l'expression, qu'on se base sur quelque chose qui est en existence, que le travail a été fait, et puis voir si ça ne pourrait pas être adapté au niveau fédéral.
En fait, l'annonce de la semaine dernière, c'est vraiment un tampon, c'est un band-aid qu'on a mis, il n'y a rien de concret.
Ben, c'est ça, jusqu'à temps qu'on voit exactement, parce qu'il n'y a personne qui a été mis en charge de l'implantation de ce nouveau programme-là. OK? On parle à la commission encore, on a un commissaire en chef par intérim. Ça fait 2 ans que la personne a été mise en poste, et puis le gouvernement n'a pas jugé bon de mettre quelqu'un en permanence. Alors, on pose un peu la question du sérieux de faire avancer ces initiatives-là. Mais encore une fois, on demeure optimiste, on demeure positif dans ce type d'annonce-là, mais c'est notre mandat, c'est de surveiller qu'est-ce qui se passe au niveau de ces annonces-là. Faut penser aussi qu'il y a présentement un recours collectif qui, justement, demande ce type de changement-là. Mais nous, le secrétariat, on demeure comme le chien de garde qui va surveiller comment est-ce que ça va être mis en place et pour le futur. Hein? Merci.
I have a question for Chris Aylward. It's for my colleague Estelle regarding Canada Life. The lawyer of your union just said in the committee that the union filed a policy grievance against the Treasury Board in regards to the Canada Life MSH international fiasco. Why did you decide to file this policy, and what amount are you expecting to get in compensation?
We're here for a Black Class Action lawsuit. I will certainly interview you after, but I'm not going to address that here. Thank you. Thank you.
One last question? No? Wait, go.
Just wanted to circle back on the Human Rights Commission. Are you calling for the head of the commission to step down? When you talk about you want a leadership change, what would that look like? And what specifically are the actions that you would like to take at the Human Rights Commission?
Sure. So we are seeking to have permanent leadership. The interim leadership has been there since, I believe, November 2022. So I think there needs to be some security in that regard, but we're seeking to have representation in that leadership role, a qualified and competent black leader the Commission has never had a black leader. So we're certainly seeking not an indictment on the present interim Chief Commissioner, but we need to have a permanent leadership at all levels at that senior level of the Commission, even at the executive director level, we need changes.
Let's conclude the press conference. Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Oh, just wait 1 second. You guys get in there. The folks that were here, the staff, you guys.
You gotta move this.